This is episode 43 of the Indie Film Academy podcast. Today we're talking with legendary filmmaker Roger Corman. So,
Year 2000. America is a vast speedway. People line the streets to witness the greatest drivers on earth in a race from sea to shining sea.
This is a death race.
You finish first, or not at all. Death Race 2000. Every car a deadly weapon. Every spectator a potential point. Cross-country road wreck, and the traffic is murder.
Who are you, anyway?
Frankenstein. National hero. Best driver on earth.
I don't want you to die.
He was built by the world's finest surgeons to drive the fastest car ever designed, and nothing can stop him now. Death Race 2000, rated R.
Welcome to the Indie Film Academy podcast, where it's all about learning how to make and market your independent film online. And now your host, Jason Buff.
welcome to the Indie Film Academy podcast. I'm your host, Jason Buff. Thanks for joining us here today. We have a super guest on. Today we're talking with one of my heroes, Mr. Roger Corman. Now, just between us, I was scared as hell to just give Roger Corman a call. I was sitting in my office and I got his very nice secretary told me a time to call in, and it's kind of like all of a sudden I was on the phone with one of my heroes. Roger Corman really is someone who all indie filmmakers should know about and should definitely understand his contribution to the world of independent film. He's also responsible for giving the first break to a lot of people that my generation considers the filmmakers that really influenced them, like Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, Jonathan Demme, Joe Dante, and Ron Howard. So what I want to do is listen to some of them talk about how Roger Corman influenced their filmmaking. The first interview I want to go to is with Jonathan Demme, who said this about Roger Corman in the documentary Roger Corman, Hollywood's Wild Angel, a 1978 documentary.
Well, in any film that I've ever worked on with Roger, there are three main elements that he's looking for. One is humor, which he considers tremendously important. Another is action, which he considers very important. And another is sex, which he considers important, but not quite as important as the other two elements, I don't think. But it's funny the way these things pop up, because, for example, in my script for Caged Heat, hand your script in, and what Roger does is sometimes he'll give the notes right on the script and hand it back to you. So you get the script back, and you get little marginal references like breast nudity possible here, question mark, which, yes, you realize, yes, it is possible here, and you don't want to get too idealistic because actually you don't have negative feelings about nudity anyway. So you go, yes, Roger, indeed it is. And that's the bargain you make with Roger. If you buy his, it's never articulated, I don't think, but if you buy his concept that pictures that audiences like contain these three major elements, action, humor, and sex, and you really buy it, and you kind of commit to getting as much of that stuff as possible in there, and if you also want to make a good picture and tell a good story, then the best of both worlds happens. He gets a movie that contains these things, and he's confident of releasing it, and you get a chance to make a picture very much the way you want to make it.
I know that you've worked with, you gave so many people their start, so many great talents their start. Francis Ford Coppola worked with you before he really worked with anyone else. Isn't that true?
Yes, right. As a matter of fact, he was the sound man, the second assistant director, and shot second unit all on one picture.
Really?
Very versatile.
Okay, and did you know then this kid's going places?
Actually, I knew he was good. I had no idea that he was going to go to the heights he did.
Okay. Ron Howard, I think, also got one of his first directing jobs with you. Is that right?
He started with us as an actor, and the picture was called Eat My Dust, a car chase film. It was a big success, and he came into the office and he said, I know you want to do a sequel. When a star plays a role in a successful film, he always asks for more money.
Right.
I will star in the next picture, no more money, and I will do an additional job. And I said, what is that? And he said, I'll direct. And I said, Ron, you always look like a director to me.
No. You influenced the way film trailers are made. I think many people, especially young people, think that film trailers have always been similar. But no, you really changed the way they were made with a certain innovation. What is it you did?
Well, it was Joe Dante who went on to become a very well-known, successful director who started cutting trailers for us. And he was cutting one trailer, and I looked at it and I said, Joe, this is a fairly dull trailer. What can you do to jazz it up? He said, come back this afternoon. I went back this afternoon, and there was the same dull trailer. In the middle was an exploding helicopter. It made the trailer.
Let me ask you a question. Was there an exploding helicopter in the film?
There is no law that says everything in the trailer has
That's fantastic. The balls, man. That was incredible. So, I mean, this show would be jazzed up by a helicopter crash occasionally. You know, that's the kind of thing that would help a talk show. They should do it everywhere.
We could give you the stock footage.
Would you charge me for it?
Very little, especially.
You've got great titles for your films. One of my favorites, Attack of Crab Monsters.
Yes.
And there's of course the title for it. So many amazing titles over the. Do you come up with the title first and then decide to shoot the film? How does it work?
Sometimes. For instance, Grand Theft Auto, which was Ron Howard's first film as a director, the title came first. But the film he did before, Eat My Dust, I've forgotten the title. We were shooting a car chase somewhere out in the San Fernando Valley, and dust was flying all over the place. And the director said, we ought to call this picture Eat My Dust. I said, we will. And he said, I'm joking. I said, I'm not joking. That's a great title. So the title came.
Now, of course, that was Conan O'Brien, and now here's Ron Howard talking about working with Roger Corman.
Several conversations that were really significant during the course of making Grand Theft Auto. The first was, he sat me down and said, Ron, I'll come visit you on the first day of filming. And if you're productive and, you're making around 20 setups a day and you're making your days, you won't see much of me. In all candor, if you're not achieving those kind of results, you're going to see one hell of a lot of me. That was his little warning. I had a great moment on the Paramount lot. I was finishing up the season of that season of Happy Days, walking along, and as soon as hiatus came in March, I was going to go direct Grand Theft Auto, and Jonathan Demme called me from out the window at of his second story office. He was getting ready to do Citizen Band, I think, and of course I knew him as a Roger Corman veteran. And he came bounding down the stairs and he said, I heard you're going to direct a picture for Roger. Come upstairs. And I went upstairs and he talked to me for about 20 minutes. He gave me these sheets that he would use to sort of plan out the shot lists and the day, and gave me great advice. Here's this young guy saying, make sure you get plenty of sleep. This hipster guy. And he basically said, Roger will let you creatively do whatever you want to do. That's the fantastic thing about working for Roger. You just have to make sure that you're efficient, and here's how you do it, and remember to think ahead, and just lots of good fundamentals, but also encouraging me to explore and be creative and really, take advantage of this opportunity that Roger was giving me. I finally carried my end of a great tradition and cast Roger in Apollo 13. He had a very nice scene playing a senator with Tom Hanks, and it was a really wonderful day to reconnect with Roger, have him come. We had it was a big day with green screen, and we were doing visual effect shots, and it was just A+ Hollywood filmmaking. And he just smirked and said, well, we could do this for a hell of a lot less. And he could.
All right, and now my interview with Roger Corman. Before we go to that, I just want to mention I've put together a Roger Corman board. If you're on Pinterest, go to the Indie Film Academy Pinterest account, and I've got an entire board with all kinds of movies and information about Roger Corman there. So check that out, and here we go. I was watching the documentary Corman's World recently. The thing that I thought was very interesting to see was that you're still going down and being on the set. Do you find the same excitement being on a set these days?
It's always exciting to be on the set. I'm probably not as excited as earlier, but the stimulation is still there. After you've done it, I've made around 300 films. There's a certain routine, but there's something always a little bit new.
How have things changed? I mean, now that you are working in the digital world and video on demand and the Sci-Fi Channel, has your system changed and the way that you go about distribution?
It's changed a little bit when you mention distribution. It's changed for the better in production, and it's changed at least for those of us working in medium budget and lower budget films. It's changed for the worst in distribution. In production is easier. The new digital cameras, the sound equipment, the lighting equipment, everything is lighter, more portable, easier to use. So you can shoot more on natural locations, and you can shoot faster and more efficiently. So production is better today, the conditions of production. The conditions of distribution, however, are not good for the independents. The major studios today, with their $100 million and $200 million budgets and their $30, $40, $50 million marketing campaigns, have dominated theatrical to such an extent that very few medium or low budget independent pictures get a theatrical distribution. Primarily, we're on DVD, streaming, cable, some broadcast television, and only occasionally in theaters today. Is
there a certain period of time that you look back on in your career and kind of reminisce about as being the glory days of filmmaking?
Probably for me, the 60s and 70s. The 60s was when I was having most fun and most success as a director. I started directing at around 58 or something like that. First couple of years, you sort of learn what you're doing, and then things started to move for me in the 60s. And in the 70s, I started my own production and distribution company, and I moved from directing to producing and distributing, and that was a whole new world as well. So for that, about a 20-year period, I was probably having the most fun and the most success. Things still work out. I'm still producing, still distributing, but I make fewer films today, and just that. I make fewer films. They get a limited distribution, and I'll continue for a few more years.
You started out working as writing notes on screenplays, right? And you eventually did some notes for the Gunfighter, right?
Yes. Actually, right. I graduated from Stanford with a degree in engineering, and I was a failure of the Stanford engineering class. I got the worst job of anybody. I got a job as a messenger at Fox for $32.50 a week, and I rode the bike around the studio delivering messages. And then I worked fairly hard, did some extra work, and became a reader in the story department. And that was where I first got a little bit of minor recognition for my work on the Gunfighter. I didn't like various things that were going on, so I had some college time left on the GI Bill, so I went to Europe, went to Oxford briefly, and then came back and became a literary agent and sold my own script under an assumed name, and took the money from that and started my production company.
How did you know how it was all going to work and where you were going to sell the film, or did you just kind of go into it like a leap of faith?
It was a total leap of faith. I think back and I wonder how I had the nerve to do it.
Well, I think that, your career has shown that you've taken a lot of leaps of faith like that. And now, when you first started, did you have the idea that you could keep a career going as long as you were making films at a low enough price that you could always sell them?
It wasn't quite that easy.
Okay.
I finance my films with my own money, and since I don't have that much money, I can't make giant films. So the budget level was more or less predetermined. And I don't really think or ever thought of it as how long can I keep going. I just felt that everything is going well, I'll continue making films. So there was a little bit of a sort of a long-term plan, but to a large extent, it was day to day. I'm going to make this film, I'm shooting this film, I'm planning the next film, and so forth.
What did you learn from making films that people really wanted to see? You obviously tapped into something in the marketplace that was selling tickets and got people coming in and got people excited. Are there any sort of things that are specific to your films that really kind of you developed and learned how to sell a film?
Well, early on, I appealed to a teenage audience. I was very much aware that the audience was a young audience, and the major studios were casting their great stars, which meant to a large extent a 50-year-old leading man making love to a 40-year-old leading lady, and the average age of the audience was 18. So I felt, and I totally understood why they did it. Their stars were the equivalent of brands. The stars were famous and could sell tickets. But I felt if I went with young people, I could appeal directly to a young audience, and I worked in genres. Not always, but generally, I was doing action pictures, horror films, science fiction films, sometimes deliberately straight teenage films, and so forth.
Were there any other movies, like genre films? They were fairly non-mainstream back in those days. I mean, nowadays it seems like horror movies are very mainstream, and especially science fiction and everything, especially after Star Wars and all those sorts of movies. But back in those days, was it something that was more of like a drive-in movie theater or more like B movies?
Yes. The drive-ins were very important. They weren't quite as important as people think they were. Our main money still came from what we called the hard tops, the enclosed theaters, but drive-ins were a major source of income, and the drive-in audience was even younger than the hard top audience, although drive-ins did attract some families on the basis that a young family with children who couldn't afford a babysitter or something could just go to the drive-in, put the children in the back seat, watch the picture, and the children would maybe just go to sleep. So it was an inexpensive night out for them. But it still was primarily a young audience.
Do you think we've missed something now that we don't have theaters and we don't like go out and see movies now, that everybody's watching movies on iPads and on TV?
Yes, I think there's something to be said for seeing a picture, particularly a comedy, with an audience. You pick up the vibes, as it were, unconsciously from the audience. It becomes a communal or shared experience.
I was watching the 1978 documentary called Corman, Hollywood's Wild Angel. It's actually on YouTube, and it was probably one of the most, I learned so much in 2 hours of just watching that. It was incredible. And there's a great scene where they're talking with Jonathan Demme, and he's talking about the advice that you gave him as a filmmaker. And I thought it was really interesting, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And he said that the three most important elements in a film were humor, action, and sex. And sex was last, but it was still important. Do you still feel like that?
I think that I would put in the narrative storyline. I should have said that. That was probably understood.
What are some of your favorite movies that you have seen lately? More contemporary people.
Yes, as a matter of fact, possibly the most interesting film I saw last year was a film that for 3/4 of the way through I thought was one of the most brilliant films I had ever seen, and then it started to fall at the end, and it was never recognized in any way, I think, for special effects. Interstellar, which I thought was really a brilliant film, particularly, as I say, my degree was in engineering, but I had a minor in physics, and maybe it was unique to me. I tried to stay up with physics, and it was really very accurate from all the concepts of physics today. The last quarter or so, it started to get a little questionable and didn't totally hold up. But I think for the reason that, as I say, it was so brilliant so far through, and then I still think of it as possibly the best picture of the year, but nobody else seems to agree with me, or a few people agree with me.
One of the things that I had heard that you mentioned was that after the film The Intruder, you had decided that you didn't want to be as, which is a brilliant film, but I actually just saw it for the first time a couple of days ago, that you had decided to try and not, have a movie that was commercial, but have a movie within that movie that actually had a message and was a good movie within a movie that was sellable.
Yes, I felt that I had become too serious with The Intruder. It got a lot of critical acclaim, won a couple of minor film festivals, but was commercially not successful. And I felt I was too serious. I was lecturing the audience, and I felt what I would do would be to make a film an entertainment with, as we say in method acting, a text and a subtext. The text is the entertainment of the film, and the subtext would be whatever was important to me or whatever I wanted to say, but it would always be secondary to the text of the film.
Now, were you one of the first people to take the camera off the tripod and go out into the streets and kind of shoot off of sets? Was that something that you felt was, would bring more realism to your film, say, in the 60s?
Yes, I was one of the first. I wouldn't say I was the first. I know a number of people who were doing it before me, but I was one of the first to do it, and I liked that concept very much. I'd been doing my Edgar Allan Poe pictures with Vincent Price, and those were deliberately studio-bound. I wanted to have total control of everything within a studio, leaving nothing to chance. And I wanted to, and when I felt I had done enough of those films, I wanted to go completely away from that, go into the streets and shoot the world around me as I interpreted it during the 60s, which of course was a very volatile decade.
You mentioned working with Vincent Price and the Poe films. Can you talk a little bit about horror and your feeling about horror movies?
Well, horror is very complex. It's exceedingly complex. You can get horror very easily by cutting off somebody's arm or something like that. I'm not talking about that kind of horror. I'm talking about horror as a psychological concept. And I think the roots go so deep into a person's individual experience, into the whole experience of humanity, that it's a fascinating genre in which to work. You
were distributing a lot of films from foreign filmmakers. I was wondering if you had any favorite filmmakers from that, like Kurosawa or Bergman. What your favorite films were from that kind of group of people?
I would pick a few. Some of the filmmakers, Fellini, Bergman, Kurosawa, a number of others. The first one I had was Cries and Whispers from Bergman, which was, I thought, a brilliant film. Let me see. Kurosawa's Derza Uzula, which was an unusual film for him, which won Academy Award Best Foreign Film. Fellini's picture, I've forgotten the title of it, but I had a film from Fellini that also won the Academy. We won, I think in a certain number of 6 or 7 years, we won more foreign Academy Awards than everybody else combined.
Now, were you able to meet with those directors? Did you have any relationship with them, and did you learn things from them?
Yes, I met several of them, talked with several of them. Fellini said you should get out of distributing and go back to directing. I remember that. He said, "Why did you ever leave?"
You've obviously had a great influence on a lot of the people that my generation considers the best filmmakers of, the 70s and the people who really influenced us moving into the 80s. Now, when I watch a movie by, Martin Scorsese or Francis Ford Coppola, when you watch movies that they make, do you see your influence in what they make? I mean, for example, camera movement and, keeping things going?
A little bit, but basically they are their own people.
they were good before they even met me. They had the talent. I may have taught them a few things, but basically they're brilliant filmmakers. They would have been brilliant filmmakers if they'd never met me.
What do all these people have in common, the great filmmakers, the James Camerons and all these guys that you work with? What is there something that you saw in them that just made them great?
Well, I've been asked that question before, and I would say there are three things. One, every one of them was intelligent. I've never met a successful writer, producer, or director who's been successful over a long period of time who wasn't intelligent. The second was the ability to work. Making films to a certain extent is glamorous and exciting, but also it is very, very hard work. Those two things you can kind of figure out. The third is creativity. They are all creative, and that you only learn about a person by working with them.
I also watched Death Race 2000, and I was wondering if when you watched The Hunger Games, if you had any reaction to that.
I definitely had that reaction, both from Death Race and its follow-up picture, Death Sport. Death Sport, a number of things went wrong. It's not a good picture, but the thoughts in it, and Death Race, on the other hand, was a pretty good picture. It won some poll, was the greatest B picture of all time. I think, without question, some of the thoughts in Death Race and Death Sport are in The Hunger Games and some other things. On the other hand, as far as I know, Death Race and Death Sport were totally original, but if I say that, there's going to be somebody who will say, you're forgetting the German expressionist film of 1919 that had the same concept. So you can never say you were really the first. And it's very possible that I think whoever wrote The Hunger Games had never seen Death Sport or Death Race. They probably thought they were doing something totally original as well.
Well, it also reminded me a lot of Mad Max, and actually more like Mad Max 2. You know, did you ever see that connection?
Yes. Who was the actually in that case it's an Australian director. He told me he had seen Death Race.
George Miller.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And he said he had seen Death Race. And he said he was inspired by him, but he didn't copy anything. He got a general idea of a genre and did two brilliant original films.
Right.
Because,
well, yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
Well, I mean, the thing that you feel when you watch that is just the danger. You know, you feel the speed, and you feel like, I mean, that's one of the things that films I think have lost a lot nowadays is just the actual, you know, you're doing everything in camera. There's not really any visual effects. I mean, there was like a matte painting, I remember. But other than that, I mean, everything is real and not like digital effects. So when I watch movies like that, it's a lot realer than watching, you know, some of these movies that are like the superhero movies where you know that they can do it all in a computer.
Yes. And I think the audience unconsciously knows that. They can sense it to a certain extent. The stunts that can be done today are far superior to what we were doing in camera. What you can do with a computer are just light years ahead. Yet at the same time, the audience almost senses they're too good. They know this can't really be.
Now, I wanted to talk for just a second about if you could give a lot of people that listen to this are first-time filmmakers and people that are out there trying to make, you know, their first independent films. Can you talk a little bit about what people can do to have success in the film industry and make a film that's, like you said, a movie that is good, but also a film that will sell and that can keep them going?
Well, as William Goldman once said, nobody knows anything. He's partially true, but I would say this. A lot of people have a general idea. You don't know, but you have a general idea. So I could say a few things, and even before I say them, I will know that somebody will go out and do something totally opposite from what I say you should do and have a giant success and do it brilliantly. So it really depends upon the ability of the filmmaker, but probably to not get into a deep, long discussion, the one thing that I would say is most important is preparation, particularly if you have a short schedule or a small budget. You want to do as much of your thinking as you possibly can before you ever appear on the set. You want to have your story worked out. You want to have talked with your actors, worked out the basic red line, as Stanislavski said, of the actor's performance. You want to have your own shots sketched out, knowing, however, you will never follow your plan exactly. Something that happens that causes you to change. Sometimes for the better, sometimes you'll get a better idea. But I put heavy emphasis on pre-production planning.
Is that how you were able to do Little Shop of Horrors in 2 days?
Yes, we rehearsed 3 days. What happened, a studio had these sets. We just shot on sets that were there. That's the reason I made the picture. And I knew that the Screen Actors Guild at that time, I think it's still this way, hiring an actor for 5 days for a week is not much more expensive than hiring. As a matter of fact, it's about as expensive it was to hire an actor for a week as for 3 days on a daily rate. So I hired all the actors for a week. We rehearsed 3 days and then went in and shot for 2 days, having worked everything out in the first 3.
I have to ask you this. Now, I know that you're a fan of Stanley Kubrick, right?
Yes.
I was wondering how did you feel about The Shining when you saw that, and did you talk to Jack Nicholson about that after?
I did. I thought I think Kubrick is one of the great directors, and I think The Shining is one of his best films. I'm not certain it's his best film, but it's one of his best films. So I have total admiration for Stanley and for that picture, and Jack was brilliant in it. I do have one story that Jack told me. When we were working, people used to say I printed the first take. I seldom did, but I would print generally the second or third take or something like that. Stanley is famous for shooting and shooting and shooting. He went over 100 takes on one shot with Jack, and Jack is a good guy. He stood there and he went until Stanley printed, the 112th or 113th take, and when he was finished, he went over to Stanley and said, "Stanley, I'm with you all the way, but you have to know I generally peak around the 70th or 80th take."
Did you ever have a chance to meet Stanley Kubrick?
I met him once, just talked to him briefly early in his career. He had done his first film was a crime story built around a racetrack. And it was a medium, low-budget film. And I remember it was after he had done that. And I was just talking to him, and I said, "This is one of the best, if not the best, first films I've ever seen." And it was clear from there that he was going to have a brilliant career. Was
that The Killers?
Yes, that's what it was. I had forgotten. Right.
That had a brilliant ending, too, with the suitcase and the money flying out of it and everything.
Yes.
I always end my interviews with 2 questions. One is, do you have a resource like a book or something that's been very influential to your life, or something that you can recommend to filmmakers?
Well, I'll give you an answer that doesn't apply exactly. The most influential book to me was when I was in college studying math, and I studied calculus. The whole concept of calculus, which is to a certain extent could be described as the mathematics of movement. The problems of calculus, I won't get into all of that. Calculus, the problem and the solving of the problem, I thought was so brilliant and such an example of what the creative mind can do that's probably influenced me more than any other book.
If you could go back in time and talk to yourself when you were 20 years old, what advice would you have for yourself?
I would probably say at the age of 20 to try to get as broad and varied an education as you possibly can. I think the fact that I majored in engineering caused me to specialize too much in a certain branch of knowledge, whereas a liberal education encompassing literature, art, philosophy, economics, psychology, all of that is the best preparation for a full life, whether professionally or personally.
did you follow that because you felt like you had to have something to kind of fall back on and to have a career?
Well, my father was an engineer, and I simply started off to follow in his footsteps, and it wasn't until I became the film critic of the Stanford Daily and started analyzing films that I realized this is what I wanted to do. But I'd spent 4 years studying engineering.
Did you ever use any of that knowledge for filmmaking?
Well, as I say, going back to calculus, I use some of the knowledge, but I also use some of the way in which you think as an engineer or a physicist or a mathematician. There's a thought process of problem solving which can be very creative and very satisfying and very useful at the same time.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time and talking with me.
Very good. I thank you.
All right, that's going to do it for today. I want to thank my guest, Mr. Roger Corman, for coming on the show, and we'll be back next Tuesday. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Academy podcast. Don't forget to join our newsletter for more tips